colonies, especially early in the war, but the colonials kept hanging on. They didn't fight fair. They didn't line up in neat rows on the battlefield where every man could then be gunned down easily. Instead, they hid behind rocks and trees and launched ambushes. They fought in all kinds of ungentlemanly ways. King George was especially peeved at General George Washington, who commanded the Continental Army. The guy just didn't know when he was beat. Eventually, it got to the point where several of the officers in the British Army came up with a plan: kidnap and kill George Washington. It was a cut off the head of the snake type of approach. They figured that without Washington, the rebellion would die. So they set out to do it, twice. The first attempt is sometimes referred to as the Hickey Plot, which was centered around a soldier named Thomas Hickey. He had become disillusioned with the rebel army and thought offing Washington might win him favor with the crown. There are a few different versions of Hickey's plans. Hickey supposedly had the idea to sneak in some poisoned peas to the Washington household for the general to eat. Since peas were Washington's favorite veggie, this was probably a pretty sound plan. In one telling, a tavern keeper's daughter became friendly with Hickey and learned of his plot. She was also a friend of General Washington through her father. She went to inform Washington of the plan right about dinner time. He was about to take a bite of peas, and she snatched them out of his hands and dumped them out the window. According to the legend, some chickens outside scarfed down the peas and immediately keeled over dead. This is probably unlikely, although it makes a really good story, especially the keeling over chickens part. What is far more likely is that Hickey was a blabbermouth when he was serving a prison sentence for passing counterfeit money. While in jail, he probably spilled the beans of the pea plan to another prisoner, who then tried to get out of jail faster by snitching on Hickey. Either way, there really was a plot to assassinate Washington, and Hickey was a part of it. When the deadly dinner was exposed, it became clear that the plans went beyond just poisoned peas. It was a complicated plot involving dozens of British operatives and soldiers. If the ruse had been successful, it most likely would have ended the revolution almost before it began. One American patriot described the derailed murder this way: "The greatest and vilest attempt ever made against our country. I mean the plot, the infernal plot, which has been contrived by our enemies." Washington purposely chose New York City as his base of operations for a variety of reasons. His headquarters on the island of Manhattan was accessible by water, which made a retreat possible by ship or boat if the Redcoats took control of the King's Bridge, the span that connected northern Manhattan to the mainland. The population of New York City in 1776 was around 25,000 people. It was the largest city located between Philadelphia and Boston, which allowed easier travel to important Revolutionary War battle sites. But the city was also a Tory, loyalist, stronghold, which made it a good place for a plot to assassinate General Washington to develop. All of the loyalists in New York made for a ready British spy network. Washington was an observant fellow. After he arrived in New York to establish his headquarters, he realized that many Tories were feeding information to the British with no concerns about any consequences. So Washington decided that fear of reprisal was needed. He wrote a letter to the local Committee of Safety, telling them to prevent any future correspondence with the enemy and to bring condign punishment that is deserved, to such persons as may be hardy and wicked enough to carry it on. But the committee dragged their feet for a few months, not really doing much at all to slow down the intelligence flowing to the British. So when the British decided to come up with a plan to kill General Washington, there was little about his movements and habits they didn't know. The principal leader of the British spy network was the loyalist Governor Tryon. The British were attempting a naval blockade of New York City, and Tryon sat in New York Harbor on a British warship. The constant spying drove Washington batty, though of course he was running his own spy network because, war. He wrote a letter to the Continental Congress. The encouragements given by